are excited, to hear a little bit more about what the path from alumni to instructor could look like. So I do have a little presentation, which I'll use kind of loosely. Sorry, I'm going to just share my screen. We mostly use Google Meets now, so being back in Zoom is like a little bit of a blast from the COVID past for me. Oh, shoot. Sorry. Oh my gosh, how do I click present on here? Just
slideshow.
Start from beginning. Okay. Oh my gosh. This is why I need all your support. You should have seen me when I was teaching online. So welcome everyone. I'm excited to chat with you a little bit about sort of what the behind the scenes looks like in the Dragon staffing world and how that might impact all of you who are Dragons alumni and what it might look like to become an instructor one day. I'm Beth. I have been the Dragon Staffing Director for the past year and a half-ish. Before that, I was a Dragons instructor. I currently live in Colorado, right outside of like the Boulder, Denver area. I moved here 2 years ago with my partner, who is also in the outdoor experiential education space. And we had both been living abroad for about 10 years, working with students, and we were pretty eager to get settled somewhere. And we landed on Colorado, which also happens to be the kind of headquarters of Dragons, which was a little bit accidental. I joined Dragons in fall of 2021, but we always joke now on the admin team, I had 3 canceled pandemic-related contracts. So right when I came into the world of experiential education, I got a contract with Dragons to work in Senegal, and I had just returned from the Peace Corps in the Gambia, and Ebola was like in full swing at that point, and we canceled that summer. Following summer, I was still dying to work for Dragons. Same thing happened. And then in summer 2020, I also was supposed to work in Senegal, and we all know what happened there. But I finally, right as I was ready to sort of retire from the instructing world, I decided to say yes to Dragons, and here I am. And before working for Dragons, I worked for many, many programs. I have kind of lost count at this point, but I think I've worked about 50 or 60 courses in about 15 different countries for other organizations. So I have always said that it's been my greatest privilege in the world to take students all over the world and cultivate educational experiences. And it still is my favorite job I've ever had, but don't tell anyone on the Dragons admin side. So I know that we have a small group today and we just met, but if you could just pop into the chat your name, your program pronouns, where you did your Dragons program, and where you currently call home, it would be great to see where everyone is calling in from.
I can start us off.
This sounds good.
Hey everyone, I'm Arian. I use he, him pronouns. I was one of the video production interns in the summer of 2022, and I went to British Columbia. Currently, I'm calling from Los Angeles, where I'm a student at the University of Southern California.
Yo, I'm Eitan. I went to Nepal Spring 2022. He, him, and Philadelphia is my home.
I'm Anna. I use she, her pronouns. I did Bridger India in 2019 and 2020. Currently don't really have I just graduated and I'm about to start the Appalachian Trail, so I'm staying at my parents' house briefly, but
Hi, my name's Sylvie. I use she, her pronouns, and I went to Ladakh, India last summer. and I live like 10 minutes away from San Francisco in a town called Burlingame.
My name is Julia. I go by she, her pronouns. I did the Colorado River Basin trip and I did the Andes and Amazon trip. And I currently call home in Ireland. But I'm here visiting my parents in Massachusetts. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the intros. It's always really great for me to hear who's on the call and who I'm chatting with. And Dragon students and alumni are really interesting. And I always love hearing kind of the trajectories of where you all are in different phases of life. So very exciting. Today I'm hoping to give you a little more insight into just understanding a little bit more about qualifications that we look for in folks. I get a lot of emails from prospective instructors, both alumni and non-alumni, who are like, hey, I feel kind of young, but I'm not sure if I'm qualified, or what can I do to strengthen my application? And it also, I wanted to demystify our process a little bit for how we form instructor teams, and then just chat a little bit more about like what I look for in applications, which I hope is helpful for you both in the Dragons context and if you just wanted to pursue this work in other organizations as well. But I get inquiries all the time, many a year, from students who are so excited about their program. They're coming back and they're really feeling the impact of a Dragons course, often very inspired by their instructors, by their peers, by the communities that they've just spent time in. And they're wondering how they can go from participating in a program to actually facilitating Dragons programs and what that career path could look like. And Dragons is interesting because we also look for very specific qualifications and skills that you may or may not have now, although I will say that being an alumni and having experienced the Dragons pedagogy certainly helps. And this is actually one of our alumni who is a current instructor. Her name's Espoir. I got to work with her in Senegal, and she's also facilitated programs for us in the US. She's done 2 Senegal semesters at this point, and she was an alumni who had spent a semester in Senegal and then stayed there for a little bit longer too. But I think when I'm looking generally, whether or not you're an alum, at your profile. So what happens when you actually apply to be a Dragons instructor? There's a page that's like, you want to be a Dragons instructor. Here are what our qualifications are. Here are the skills that we look at. Do you think you're ready? Here's the application. And some of the things that we say we look for are regional fluency, language abilities, experience with students, other experience, academic background, risk management skills, medical training, and other technical skills. So I'll break these down a little bit for you. Regional fluency and language abilities, I actually think that this is the thing that sets Dragons instructors apart from most other like organizations. And I feel like all of you could speak to this just from having experiences with our instructors. We hire, I think, first and foremost to regional fluency and language abilities. So if I'm looking at, like, I have a need for an instructor in Nepal, before anything else, I'm going to look at somebody who has Nepal experience and who speaks Nepali, because we really want our instructors, even if they have amazing experience all over the world, to kind of be able to hone in on these skill sets. And I think for me, after working in the industry for about 8 years and working in 14 different countries, it was really interesting to be able to like run a safe program, but maybe not be able to feel like I could impart the most wisdom or knowledge on my students if it was a program that was like new to me, or a country that was new to me. So for example, I remember I was running a program in Laos once, and I had never been there before. I arrived 2 days before students, and I was running a school partnership program with another organization. And I had a Laotian co-instructor who I felt like was doing all of the work and holding everything. And I'm like, why don't you let me do the safety briefing before we go to the waterfall? Like, would that be helpful to you if I took that from you? She was losing her voice and just like talking so much every day because she was sharing history and knowledge and coordinating with homestays and food and just doing everything. So I go to the front of this like group of 50 people, and I'm like, hi, okay, so we're going to be moving to the waterfall now, and we're going to be going that way. And she's in the back of the room and she's going, that way, it's that way. And then she's like, just totally correcting me because I really had no qualifications in that place. And I think for me, that's one of the most important things that I'm looking for. Even if a person like hasn't worked specifically like a Nepal course, if a person has Nepali language skills or knows Nepal, they're going to be much more well suited to our Dragons programming. And Rebecca and Sarah, welcome to the room. I'm just getting started talking about some of the qualifications and skills that I look for when I'm looking for possible instructors. And feel free to pop into the chat your name and pronouns and which course you did, so that we can all get to know you a little bit. Okay, the next set of skills that we look for, and I think a lot of alums actually gather these skills from other places besides Dragons before coming to us in the instructor capacity, is experience with students or other relevant experience or academic background. And I say that where somebody maybe has a master's degree in international development policy, or they're coming to us with, they've studied Southeast Asian or Indonesian studies after spending time on our Mekong or Indonesia programs. For experience with students, a lot of times people come to us with like experience at a summer camp or at an outdoor education organization. Or sometimes it's at university or like within your own student body. Perhaps you have a leadership experience, you're an orientation assistant, you're doing something where you have some type of leadership and you can like hold a student container and a student group. I think with alums, this feels particularly important because a lot of folks who come to us, one thing that could be challenging is if you're coming to us when you're really close to the age of students, it could be a little bit harder to kind of like separate that age and move from an alum or from a student to an instructor. And that's the feedback I've gotten from a lot of instructors who are fairly recent alums, is that they felt like they needed to like really hold the group container in a different way because they had such a close age gap. So I think that experience with students is really important. And then for other relevant experience, for example, we have one alum right now who's would be an amazing instructor, and he took some time after his university to do a Princeton in Asia program, and he's actually working for Putney this summer. So he's kind of gathering that experience of like doing other types of work that fit in really, really well into Dragons pedagogy, and also kind of having that experience with students from a different organization that he then can bring into Dragons one day. We also look for risk management, medical training, and other technical skills. So if you're a mountaineer, if you've taken any type of mental health training or wilderness first responder or wilderness first aid training, if you've worked in outdoor education at all, even spending time on the AT, Anna, would fit in really well into this. Just experiences where you've seen things that could be relevant to what might happen on a Dragons program. And all of you know and have seen some of the risks that are involved with programming. It's actually one of the things that's really special about our programming is that we move safely into situations that could be perceived as risky because we have so much trust in our instructors. And one of the ways that we hire teams that we really trust is we hire teams that have experience. So a lot of our instructors might have experience working for organizations like Knowles or Outward Bound. Some of them, so a lot of our like Southeast Asian instructors come from experiences doing mountaineering in the Himalayas. Similarly, in the Andes, we just hired an instructor who owns a trekking and guiding company in Peru. So like takes groups of people around the Andes, and he has brought like incredible risk management planning to his program. So those are other things that we see as being like incredible assets to programming. I'll stop for a second and just see if there's any questions so far. I know that I'm talking a lot.
Yeah, I was wondering what, like, you did this work for like 8 years, but then at some point it becomes like, all right, you want to have different responses. I'm asking a bigger life question. So then, like, what are the next career paths? Like, what can this Dragons instructor being this lead you to? Or like, what Dragons instructors do after they're done with this career?
It's a good question. And I would say that a lot of our like happiest instructors balance Dragons with other work and other things. So we have a lot of instructors who go back to school, a lot of instructors who work for multiple organizations, actually, which is not a weird or bad thing in this industry. I know kind of in other industries, there are all of you who might be like coming into the job market. It feels like a little weird for me to be like, yeah, like you should absolutely seek a position with Outward Bound or Knowles this summer. You'll learn so much, but we look at it as like mutually beneficial because we're teaching instructors who are then learning from other orgs who are then bringing that information to our student groups and our programming. And a lot of instructors do a lot of like kind of creative or freelance work. So a lot of our Latin American instructors right now actually do work with Indigenous communities. One of our Latin American alumni, actually, who's an instructor now, just like created this incredible story about a group of Indigenous Bolivian women who are trying to hike Everest. So people like find things they're passionate about and then find a way to like work that into being an instructor or otherwise. So I think there's like that career path where the instructor is kind of part of like a more robust work life. There's also the path of going into administrative work. So that's what I'm currently doing. And then I think we have a ton of instructors who use what they learned from being a Dragons instructor, which you're like wearing, I don't know, like 50 plus different hats. You're like nurse and parent and guardian and all these things all at once. And then you kind of apply that to maybe being a nurse as a profession or a physician or a teacher or a professor or whatever it is that you really fell in love with during your time. So I hope that's helpful for a starting answer, but I could talk about that for an hour. Like there's so many things. Okay, I was hoping to dive a little bit more into the hiring process because Dragons hiring is actually very different than a lot of other organizations, which can be frustrating from the other side if you're trying to break into Dragons, because we don't like fully hire individuals. Like you might have an amazing CV, amazing background, like you might be an incredible instructor, and we might not have a place for you based on our needs, our current instructor pool, and just what our lineup looks like. And I think part of that is because we really lean heavily on the experience of folks and having folks who have like a really robust knowledge of the parts of the world where we work and where we produce incredible programming. But because of that, there might not always be the perfect match at the right point in time. But I'm going to go first before I go into kind of like timeline and openings and what that looks like. I'm going to go a little bit into what our team creation looks like. And all of you had I-teams, probably of 3 folks. Anna, you probably had 2 OSDs, but it sounds like maybe you had like 5 or 6 OSDs. I know the semester that you were on. So it depends on different programs, but our typical instructor teams, we call them I-teams, have 3 people on them. My team had 4, and part of that was because this was the semester, like our second session back after COVID, and just with so many people getting COVID, we had so many evacuations the session before mine that Dragons decided to bring in another instructor. So I was on a team with that Samba in the blue to my right, Espoir in the middle, and then Babacar. So Babacar and Samba, long time Dragons instructors. Espoir was like brand new. And then I was brand new to Dragons. So we were a well-rounded team, but a little bit unique. But the way that we kind of look at teams, and I call this an evolving model because it's changing a little bit, just like with this sort of next generation of instructors who we're hiring, and just the way that our Dragons programs are changing a little bit. We always hire a regional expert who all of you could probably think of who that person was on your team. You might have had more than one of them. I have regional experts on here because especially on our shorter term programming, we're often hiring 2 to 3 of these folks on one team. But this is Samba So, who is like one of my favorite co-instructors of all time. He was born and raised in rural Senegal. We take student groups for their rural homestays to his community. He's fluent in so many languages, all of the languages that we teach students, among others. He went to a university, worked in development and educational NGOs, as well as for Peace Corps, also lived in the US for many years. So he is just like a rock star instructor. And he continues to organize homestays all over Senegal. So Samba is the best. He's reliable. He's one of our instructors who I'm always going to call Samba and ask him if he wants to work a program when I know a program is going to run in Senegal. He is working this summer for us in Senegal, which will be great. And then this is Berta, who is actually one of our bridge year on-site directors right now. Often we call this person the cultural bridge. So somebody who has a lot of experience in a certain country, but might not be from there. So Berta has lived in Senegal now for, I think, nearly a decade. She's completely fluent in French and Wolof. She also has lived in a rural agriculture community in Senegal. And she has this background that actually is really well suited to some of our focuses of inquiries in Senegal as well. So she's kind of this natural bridge between our majority US-based student population and Senegal itself. And then this is our former staffing director, Jenny, who when she first came to Senegal, she actually ended up marrying someone to Senegal, from Senegal, and spending a very long time there. But when she first was a Dragons instructor, she had never been there before, but she was fluent in French, and she had a WFR, Wilderness First Responder. She had a background working in West Africa, and she had over 4 years of leading groups of adolescents. So she really knew how to hold this like student container. So often this would be a perfect team, or a Jenny and a Samba and a Babacar would be a great team. So we kind of like take these pieces where we might have a Samba and we might be like, okay, Samba's good at all of the things, but we really need someone to like help him manage clinic visits who has a really strong background in medicine. And then we might look for somebody who like speaks French and was a Knowles instructor in France for a few years, or it might be him and Berta on a team. So it always sort of depends on our instructors with who we're hiring. And I call this the evolving model because as we're moving more into shorter term programs, we're actually hiring more of sort of this regional expert, where we're taking folks who are incredible from all over the world, who are from the communities where we work, and we're, rather than like them coming to us, we're often being like, hey, how do we like train you up to feel confident in running a Dragons program? And we're seeing more and more folks from the communities where we work become instructors, which is amazing. And it's like completely changed the way that I feel like Dragons has historically fallen into the model of experiential education and hiring for it. And it's also made it a little bit and different for folks coming from the US without really a knowledge base in any of the countries where we work. It's made it much harder for them to get hired. I think I'll pause there for a second and see if anyone has any questions.
Sorry, you mentioned that you had done the Peace Corps. Is that like something that you would recommend as a way to get experience in a certain country?
I think with like, I look at Peace Corps volunteers and I'm like incredibly biased, obviously. But I think that Peace Corps volunteers have like just a level of cultural humility, often really, really strong language and local context that I look at like really highly. If I know someone did Peace Corps Nepal, I'm like, great, automatic interview. Like that means that they know Nepal pretty well. Similarly with Senegal, Indonesia, like wherever Peace Corps programming runs in the countries where we also run programming, I think that there's a lot of skill sets that you gain in Peace Corps that bode really, really well to being a Dragons instructor. So I do look at Peace Corps as being like a possible route to being an instructor, kind of being involved in this work. Yeah, great question.
To be like a regional fluency like person, do you have to have connections within the place? Like, what are the degrees of regional fluency?
It's a good question. So I guess for me, the difference would be if you wrote on an application like, oh, I backpacked through Southeast Asia for like 3 months versus like, I lived and worked at a school in Ladakh for a year. Like that feels like a really different level of connection. So when I say regional fluency, it doesn't mean you have to know a place perfectly or be perfectly fluent in language, but I guess I'll also use the example, like for me coming into this role, when I work with people from all of our countries and then some, and often it's hard for me to contextualize when somebody's like, hey, we need an emergency support person in Aikile, which I think on this call, Julia, you might be the only one who knows where Aikile is. But I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Where is that place? And Aikile is a rural homestay community in Bolivia that's about 3 to 4 hours away from Cochabamba, which is kind of our main hub of programming. So I'm looking for somebody who has that context, who might know where those places are and might have context there, but they have just a level of knowledge in a country where they know or might know of the places and the cultural relevancy of like what those places mean. So similarly in Senegal, our urban homestays are in a kind of sub part of Dakar called Yaf, which has a lot of religious significance. It's like a really holy place for Muslim pilgrimages, because there's a famous mosque there, and it's inhabited mostly by people from the Wolof ethnic group. And where Samba's from, it's inhabited mostly by people from the Pular or Fulani ethnic group. And for people to know that, like, that's what I'm looking for. So you don't have to know everything, but just to know a little bit more to help you work both with your co-instructors and to be able to like share that knowledge base with students feels really important to me. So is that helpful? And a lot of you, like, you all know these things from where you've done programs. Like, I could learn something from each of you about where you've done Dragons programs and you could teach that to me. And I think one thing that's really unique about our alums is that you have that regional fluency in the places where you've done a program, which I think is pretty cool and gives you a little bit of a one-up. Awesome. Any other questions? Okay. So our types of programming right now are also evolving a little bit. Dragons started as a mostly summer organization. So we did like massive hiring in the summer. We used to run like 40 summer programs. This year we're running 14. So things have changed a little bit where students aren't traveling as much in the summers. Semesters also, students aren't traveling quite as much. The gap industry is shifting and evolving a little bit. And we're seeing a massive increase in school programs where we have schools that we partner with where they are like, hey, can Dragons take 30 of our students to rural Indonesia for a 2-week program focused on food and climate change? And we create that program for them. I think with that type of programming, we're looking a little bit more for full-time staff, almost like people who can work not just the summer, not just the semester, but like have availability throughout the year, because we're seeing the need for like people to work back-to-back shorter programs that are like 10 days or 2 weeks. So that's shifted a little bit. We still have academic programs, so we still work with Princeton and we work with Tufts now as well. So we're running 2 programs with Tufts this fall in Thailand and in Peru. We also run programs for adults and for educators, so for teachers or professors or folks in the academic space. And then we also run custom family and friends programs. My personal dream to take all my best friends or family on a Dragons program with Hemant, ideally. But kind of that's like the landscape of our programs. So when I'm looking at the staffing picture, for example, like I'm looking ahead to next spring to see where I might have some gaps. So right now I'm seeing like, oh my gosh, we have 6 overlapping programs in Taiwan, and we only have about 8 staff who could work there. I need to do hiring for Taiwan specific programs, where Indonesia, we've got about 10 staff and only 2 programs. So I don't really need to hire someone with Indonesia experience when I already have 10 folks who would love that work. So that's sort of what happens in my brain and the way that I work with various other departments like Dragons to kind of figure out where our needs are. And I know you all can't see like inside of my brain, but it's like a crazy calendar with like where my blocks and spaces, it's like a little Tetrisy. And it changes all the time. I think things that have been really interesting with our programming and needs as well is world events really, really play into program needs. So last year there was political unrest in Guatemala, Bolivia, and Peru, like different points throughout the year. And we saw a massive decline in interest in Bolivia and Peru. This year, we've seen a decline in interest for Morocco, just due to things happening in Gaza and in Israel. Even though they're a little bit far away, there's an association there. So it's really interesting too to think about what enrollment looks like and how that relates to staffing. So sometimes when I share with people like, hey, I would love to hire you for Nepal, but there was just an earthquake there and we don't actually know what the interest will be for our fall programs, I might take an instructor who's incredibly qualified and put them on hold a little bit, telling them I still want to work with them and there's uncertainty. And I know that sounds crazy. Like I'm here trying to tell you to be a Dragons instructor and also telling you that it's uncertain. And I think that's just the nature of the industry. And I want to be really transparent about that. Any questions about kind of our programming, our calendar, types of programs that we do? Okay, I'm gonna keep cruising. One fun thing about our instructors is that like we really, really invest in our instructors. I'm currently planning, along with my team, our regional orientation in Thailand this year. So we're bringing all of our instructors from Asia locations to Thailand, and then all of our instructors who are working in Latin America this summer to Guatemala. And we're running a wilderness first aid training, and we will train all of them, whether they've worked for us for many years or are new, in risk management and in experiential education and in mental health first aid. And We offer professional development for language study, or sometimes people get like advanced first aid certified, or they get other certifications. We have some instructors who want to work on their English, or some instructors who are like, hey, I want to take this climbing course, or I want to do this thing that's like related to me being an instructor. And we love to support those things. But I think one thing in this industry that's really interesting is it is a bit like I even say I like to run a program like at least once a year, because it feels like flexing a muscle of just learning the art of balancing both macro, like these big pedagogical ideas, and these little micro needs, like this student has a stomach ache and I have to keep an eye on them, and I have to remember that like I can't have peanut oil touching any of the food that I order ahead at the restaurant tonight. So you're managing like all these things, and it is a very specific muscle and very specific skill set, and we really try to teach instructors how to hone and grow in those skills, and also want to support them along the way. So a lot of times our Dragons instructors like might come in a little bit like newer or green, and we love to continue to support them and to provide feedback so that they can continue to grow. And it's been really cool, even in my like under 2 years in this role, I've seen some of our newer instructors just grow immensely with every program, and it's such a gift to continue to invest in them and get to know them. And we still believe, and I definitely still believe, that we hire the best educators in the industry just based on their background and based on our criteria, and also based on age. I think we hire often a little bit older, and it's not saying that somebody who's 23 can't be an amazing instructor. I think the key there is just pairing a newer instructor who might be one of you with somebody who has a lot of experience in the industry, and making sure that we're giving them the tools for success so that they can also continue to step into the role that's very challenging with a lot of grace. But we continue to have instructors come back and work for us again and again and again. Even if they work for other organizations, they often still come back to us, and we love that. I talked a little bit about kind of our needs breakdown. But for timeline, often people are like, when should I apply? The answer is anytime, which I think with my Tech Choice timeline that I kind of like laid out in a very messy way, the answer is like needs pop up all the time. There is really no timeline. We often loosely hire about like 4 to 6 months, sometimes less, before our big season, so before fall and summer, but we're hiring constantly throughout the year. So sometimes a person might get a contract like 9 months before a program if the timing aligns, and sometimes it might be 1 month before the program if we have a cancellation or a late addition of a program. So the timeline is kind of like whenever your timeline in life aligns is a good time to apply. It's a rolling application, so you can apply at any time. And then, as I mentioned before, we're always hiring for needs, so for very specific openings that come up. So oftentimes that doesn't quite align with your timeline, but it doesn't mean that it won't at some point in time. It's kind of funny talking to people about their Dragons hiring story, because a lot of times it's like mine, where it's like, hey, I had like 3 canceled contracts, or I applied and 2 years later, my timeline finally like opened up with Dragons. And at least for me, I was really happy that I had a few more years to gain experience before I came into being a Dragons instructor. And for some people, the timeline opens up right away. So it just sort of depends. I think for next steps, and then I'll pause the presentation and I can answer any remaining questions. But I think my biggest advice for alums specifically who are interested in becoming instructors are, you all have this incredible experience. You know what a Dragons program is, you've lived it, and oftentimes, if not always, what you've learned on a Dragons program is kind of guiding you towards whatever comes next. And I think that just like continue to follow paths that feel exciting to you. And if they end up being in the instructor world, I think that your path will lead you there. And I also just always tell people to get more experience. I'm like, if you're a freshman in college, like go be an orientation leader, like go do some type of like outdoor backpacking trip, go try to be an instructor for that. Just try to do things that feel like they're aligned with instructor work. And those experiences will both like help with your application, but more so like help inform you in terms of like the way that you lead, what you want to do, and just growth in that work itself. And I think just continuing to seek out relevant trainings, whether it's a wilderness first aid, whether it's a training on like climate resilience in Bolivia or whatever it is, like all of these factors come into play with being a successful instructor. You can always email me, staffing@wheretherbedragons.com. I'm on the other side of that email. And we're kind of slowing down from our busy time of the year. If you emailed me in the past 3 months, there's a chance that you might have to ping me again, but feel free to email me, and I'm usually happy to hop on a call depending on what time of the year it is, or just to chat in more detail via email. Or you can always say like, hey, Beth, I came to your webinar. I'm just curious if now would be a good time to apply for like what I'm trying to plan my year. And I'm curious if it feels like this is a good time to apply. So I'm always happy to answer those questions. Any other questions from any of you? Thanks for listening to me talk. I know that's a lot of me talking at you.
Quickly, could you like name all the other like ones? I know there's Knowles, there's Outward Bounds. Could you tell me some more?
All the other types of organizations similar to
The
Dragons.
ones that come to your head.
Okay, Carpe Diem, Adventures Cross Country, Wilderness Ventures, Moon Dance Adventures. My partner works for Avid 4, like number 4 Adventure, which does outdoor education stuff. Great org. If you want to work for her, she's great. Oh my God, where was I? Putney, a lot of our instructors work for Putney in the fall. Princeton in Asia, Princeton in Africa aren't same, but like super relevant, cool experiences there. There's also Pacific Discovery, Rustic Pathways, and then they have a bunch of subsidiaries with them. And there's a lot more, but that's where I'm at right now. Those are some of the big names. Yeah. Those are, I would say Carpe Diem often, like we share instructors with them, as well as Putney, Outward Bound, like Knowles as well. So those are like a lot of the big ones. I'll stop recording in case